Tak já vás všechny vítám na druhém panelu. Trošku bych napomenul především ty zadní místnosti, aby se sklidnili. Kde ten mikrofon? Slyšíte mě?
Calm down a little bit. Can you hear me properly?
Takže,
Is this mic on?
Jak tady říkala paní ředitelka na začátku,
je
to, co tady dneska plánují, součást širšího nebo delšího konceptu připomínání cest, který vždycky má stejný charakter dvou panelů, to znamená, nejprve se mluví o té události samotné, jejich souvislostech s pamětníky, a v druhém panelu se mluví o budoucnosti česko-německých, česko-amerických, česko-izraelských vztahů a tak podobně. A o tom tedy budeme mluvit na tom panelu, také na panelu číslo 2. Takže já bych přivítal všechny panelisty, vítám velkou novinářovou novinářku z Reflex, vítám Jiřího Pehe, ředitele New Yorkské univerzity. Možná bych tady mohl říct, že my jsme tady taková trojka z univerzity, tam učíme všichni. Vítám pana Ray Castillo from the American Embassy and Daniel Anýž from Hospodářské noviny, long-term correspondent of Hospodářské noviny from the United States. Takže já bych na úvod se zeptal, at the beginning, je vlastně v dnešní době něco skutečně specifického na česko-amerických vztazích, protože vlastně mně se zdá, že minimálně polovinu, možná větší část toho panelu bych raději soustředil na budoucnost evropsko-amerických vztahů jako takových, protože to je asi důležitější a aktuálnější a tak dále.
It's very topical. So let me start with this question. Is there anything important and specific about Czech-American relations? Perhaps Mr. Jiří Pehe can take the floor. Good afternoon. When it comes to Czech-American relations, and their specificity, I believe they got in a new context, in the context of the government, which slightly changed the accent of its foreign policy. It's because the foreign affairs team tried to reformulate some priorities of the Czech policy. They tried to divert from the legacy of Václav Havel, from the so-called human rights transcendentalism, and it obviously provoked reactions in the United States. The Czech Republic was long-term connected with the United States through Václav Havel and through that so-called human rights transatlantism. So the accent has changed, and it brought about negative reactions in Washington. Prime Minister Sobotka later on tried to mitigate some consequences of this reformulation, and he was successful to a certain extent. But I don't think that the relations with the US are currently as good as they used to be under previous governments. It is also contributed by the Russian-Ukrainian crisis, or rather war by Russia against Ukraine, and also the attitude of some Czech politicians, including the Czech president. It's viewed in Washington in a way that is far from positive. So it all contributed to the fact that our relations are slightly more obscure, let me put that this way. Am I supposed to talk about American and Russian relations? No, just Czech and the US. So it was quite brief. What about Dan Anýž? Would you like to add something to that? Yes, there are certain specifics, such as the attempt to have Czech radar, Czech base in the Czech territory. It still can be viewed as a recent affair. On the other hand, Václav Havel in November last year, his bust was revealed in the US, which was a great honor. So are Czech-US relations specific when compared to US-Swiss relations, for example? Hello. Let me add to what Jiří Pehe said, that Czech-American relations have never been normal after 1989, in the positive sense of the word. In the 1990s and short afterwards, it was owing to the personality of Václav Havel and owing to the circumstances of that period. Czechoslovakia was a proof for the United States that the Western model of democracy is the winning model. And if we add the abilities of Václav Havel to that, then Czech Republic had an extraordinarily good position. It was slightly undeserved. And these days, paradoxically, leftish government, central leftish government, which should better agree with Barack Obama than the previous governments, is getting in more arguments with their US counterparts than their predecessors. They were afraid that Barack Obama would not get involved in European affairs, that he would not want to be involved. And when a deputy minister, Czech deputy minister, went to his first mission to Washington, he left a very negative impact, because he represented a turnover of the Czech policy. The only good thing is that the deputy minister is very straightforward but what is said in the Czech Republic towards the US and towards Moscow are quite unpleasant surprise for Americans. We obviously do not need to follow White House policy wherever they go. Nevertheless, our position is specific because it's incomprehensible. We are to be partners, allies in the alliance. So speaking of Soviet troops in the past does not make any sense. It's nothing new. Well, some people can be resembled of the presence of Russian troops. That's what Mr. Klaus said. And now members of the government say that. And it's perceived in America as something negative. Well, President Zeman is perceived as the president in the parliamentary system. His executive powers are not the same as those of his counterparts in the US, and people in State Department know about that or are aware of that. But if the Minister of Defense says something like that, then the situation is different. Oh, well, specificities, specific features of our relations. Let me comment on what Mr. Anýž has said. I don't think that our position in the 1990s was undeserved. I believe it was well deserved. There was someone who advocated for fast admission to NATO. He had a clear idea of where we stood. I was living in the United States between 1990 and 2001. That was a specific era for the Czech Republic when compared to Switzerland or Bosnia. Politics, poetics, philosophy of the Czech leader got to the American everyday life, to their students. They were so much interested in this country, in our history, not only under the communist era, but also in the 1990s, including negative aspects, draining of money from companies, for example. My peers, my mates, schoolmates, read books, not only by Kundera. They developed a sort of idol from the Czech Republic. Our foreign policy at that time was clearly, was very straightforward and clearly defined. Perhaps there were some steps aside, but nevertheless, what is happening now is to a certain extent a breach or a harm to our very good PR that we had in the United States in all social spheres, stratas. And the same question, is there something specific about our mutual relations?
I'm the counselor for press and cultural affairs at the American Embassy. And I hope that I can speak English because it is easier for me.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I feel in some ways that I'm very much the junior member of the panel, since I've been focused on US-Czech relations for about a year and a half now, as compared to my colleagues. But I also think that you're going to find my words slightly different, which maybe has partly to do with the fact that I'm a government representative, or maybe it has something to do with the difference between Czech and American characters. I don't know. But I see relations as very good. I see, and I think there are 2 points that show this. I think our official relations are quite good. Despite recent hiccups, we've been partners, strong partners for 25 years, but you can also look back to the friendship with Masaryk and President Wilson and the support for the First Republic and the borrowing of elements of the US experience and Constitution. You can see our strong relations as NATO partners. You can see, I served in Afghanistan last year. I was or 2 years ago. I was very saddened to hear about the sacrifice that the Czech military made guarding Bagram Air Base. And I respect it and I admire them, and I was very sad. To answer the question about the radar, I can only offer that our military cooperation is very strong. The U.S. people have through taxes and through our cooperative agreements, 2.1 billion crowns between 2007 and 2014. In the past 3 years, we've trained 1,000 Czech troops. Our trade relations are strong, $6 billion of trade. Think about 25 years ago. That just didn't exist. It couldn't exist. In fact, when I think, I appreciate Veronica's comments, when I think about my time in university, you were not considered well educated if you hadn't read Milan Kundera. My generation learned about 68 from the movie of that unbearable lightness of being. We learned something about Czech individualism from Foreman's films, and we maybe got our first real sense of Prague from Amadeus. So, and I want to turn to these cultural ties. I can recite to you the numbers of people who have gone to the United States on Fulbright fellowships or other government programs. But in the past few months that I've been here, I've only been here 6 months, I can look around me every week and see examples of Czech and American collaboration culturally, through civil society, through sports, through culture. The Penn State Glee Club is coming in May. A young women's hockey team from Washington came to play a Czech women's team in Slany. I went to Hotěbož to visit a young American teacher. I'm probably the only American government representative who's ever can say he's been to Hotěbož, which was a great little town. I enjoyed it tremendously. And that young man, he's 23, he's a rock star in that high school. He's teaching those Czech students to speak English and to ask questions boldly, such that when I went on to Masaryk University, I didn't see much difference between the questions in the high school and the more cynical college or university class. Look at NGO ties, nadaci v partnerství. Last week I think it was last week, the Malek Center had its 5th anniversary of working with USC Shoah Foundation. I mean, I consider myself a well-educated man. I studied Czech-US relations. I had no idea of the kinds of ties. For good or ill, you can walk from Václavské náměstí to Obecný dům and see TGI Fridays and McDonald's and all the rest, and that may be good or that may be bad. I just sort of say it exists. You can also meet people who work at General Electric in the design world, or in Honeywell, or at IBM. And going back in time, I've had the pleasure of meeting Rosta Čapek, who maybe partly introduced Czech listeners to country and folk music and bluegrass. And then I, in turn, was recently introduced to the movie Limonada Villoe, which can only come from some crazy relationship between the United States and the Czech Republic. I mean, think about that. The Western as reinvented by these wonderful Czech actors and musicians. And then but when I was studying Czech, I was also able fairly easily to reach out and meet different Czechs who had somehow come. One was an au pair. She was studying English and working for a family. Another gentleman had moved to the United States with his mom when he was 13. Another one had gotten a fellowship to go to my alma mater, Middlebury College. And they were able to try to help me with my Czech. I don't know that they succeeded. But I look at these day-to-day cultural ties, and I would put forth that they're just as important as the government relations. Maybe not as important as a speech from Havel in the Capitol, or a bust unveiling or potentially a major visit from a major personality. But they're really important, and they, as the ups and downs of the diplomatic relationship go, I think these relations just continue to move. Thank you.
Děkuji. Veroniku mezi tím napadlo,
Well, I would like to comment that, of course, Masaryk's concept of civic Czechoslovakism inspired by the United States is no longer here, but there is also still a big specifics present, and that is better than standard relationship between Czech Republic and Israel. And I think that in this respect, the Czech Republic shares something in common with the United States. Would you like to comment on that? Well, you can see the ingeniousness of my colleague Macháček, because I mentioned Israel and he immediately used it. And this is exactly what I had in my comment. And you asked about the specifics of the Czech-American relationships, and maybe special relationships with Israel are also a part of these specifics. I would like to make a comparison with the beginning of the 1990s. 1994, 95, there were about 30,000 young Americans who moved to Prague, and at that time it was often mentioned that Prague could become something like Paris in the 1930s. Prague Post was published in English, a daily in English. And now it is published only on the website. But at that time there was a whole flood of teachers of English, of young people who came to Prague. Maybe it was naive to expect that it would never end, but I think that this era is past now. So do you want to comment on that? Well, I think that only the character of the American presence changed. In the beginning of the 1990s, these were mostly young people, students, people who just left college and went to Prague to live something interesting or to write their first novel. I met many of these people. They usually did not write a novel, but they nevertheless had a very good time in Prague at that time. And then it's gradually changed. These people returned back to the United States. Some of them, of course, stayed, but there were new people coming, different people, representatives of multinational companies, of American companies. So I would say that the American community became more professionalized. There is much more of these people now than than in 1990s. There are many American citizens who work in various corporations now in Czech Republic, and since 1998 there has been a branch of the biggest American private university, New York University, and I'm head of this university. And in over the 16 years in which this university has been present in the Czech Republic, we had about 150 to 200 American students in every semester, so we had about 4,000 to 5,000 American students in our students. The students go through a kind of transformation here because they become very enthusiastic about anything Czech, about the Czech culture, and when they return back to the United States, they really truly become ambassadors of the Czech Republic in the United States, culture ambassadors. And I am in contact with many of my past students, and they have now reached some important positions, and they still maintain relationships with the Czech Republic. So I would say that the nature of the relationship slightly changed, and one of these changes is what I just described. Well, I have just a small remark. It was mentioned here that some of the people who came here in the 1990s stayed here. Maybe you remember a film by Nancy Bishop called Expatriates, and this is about these people who try to go back to the United States, but they feel somehow captured by Prague, entrapped in Prague. These people settled here, they now have children, and there are hundreds of these people, and they now raise a new multinational generation of half Czechs and half Americans, and I think that this is a really positive thing, and Isabella is one of them, and she sits in the next room. This is my daughter, by the way. I have one specific question to Dan Anýž. I will start with you. Why we American files used to give America as an example of a unity behind their foreign affairs policy. But when we were giving this America as an example, it changed. So what was the reason of the failure? Well, there are more reasons. There are multiple reasons. One of them is the fact that the anti-missile defense is a project that has 20 years history, and it seems that it is handed over from one administration to another US administration, but still the accents that are put on these projects change depending on whether it is Democrats or Republicans who are in charge. For instance, Bill Clinton was not so strong promoter of that project. George Bush revived that project, but when he lost a majority in Congress in 2006, at that time it was Democrats who became the heads of budgetary and defense committees in the Congress. It was clear that the president would not have such strong support as he had in the past. So it is quite clear from when we try to describe the position of the United States. If we try to describe our position, there was much stronger support in Poland than in Czech Republic. Poland really wanted to have these systems installed in their country. There will be some delay, but maybe in 2020 they will have some sort of anti-missile defense, and that means also some presence of American forces. In the Czech Republic, there was no accord achieved, and so as a result of that lack of support, uniform support on the Czech side, what Americans offered to us was downgraded, or it was the offering was made smaller because they knew that the project would not be approved by the Czech Parliament. So there are causes on both sides why this initiative was not implemented, but I think that about 60% of it goes with the Czech Republic. If we had showed more political will, we could have more of this project in the Czech Republic. Well, you mentioned political will. I think that the problem was not only in the American Congress, but also here in Czech Republic. At the time, the government was not able to secure necessary majority in the Czech Parliament to support the radar project, so it was quite an absurd situation. Condoleezza Rice came here to discuss the project, to discuss the final details of the project, and at that time in the Czech Chamber of Deputies, the governmental coalition did not have enough, did not have majority to push the project through the parliament, and it was a really difficult situation. So I think this is a failure of our political elites who were not able to reach some kind of consensus. I agree with Daniel Anýž in that. In the US, they were of course aware of this situation when Democrats set new conditions before the Obama's administration came to power. They set new conditions for implementing the project under the Bush administration, and one of the conditions was that the project would have to be functional, this itself was a problem because tests of large ballistic missiles were not good, the results were not good, and the second condition was that the project would have to be approved by the by parliaments and host countries, and they knew that there would be problems in the Czech Republic with winning the support in parliament. Did you also have the feeling that the Czech diplomacy yielded to enthusiasm, that they did not provide objective information to the American side? Yes, it is true. You described it correctly. The diplomats at that time, although they are very good professionals, the Czech embassy in the US at that time did not provide really objective information to the US side. Did not provide objective information about the proceedings, about the results of the negotiations in the Congress when they inform the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is my impression from the conversation that I had with our diplomats in Washington, and it was almost absurd to see that they did not provide objective information. So, as a result, there was a bitter surprise when the protest was cancelled on the Czech side, the Czech representation. Já jsem pracoval i v jiné zemi v té době, ale chtěl bych poznamenat něco k tomu, co jste zmínili, a to je funkčnost systému. Ten systém byl nově navržen jinak, takže by měl fungovat tak, jak bylo zamýšleno. Z hlediska Spojených států je smyslem toho systému fungovat jako štít, který bude chránit proti hrozbě z Iránu. Takže ta základní myšlenka je ta, že základním cílem toho projektu je poskytnout ochranu Evropě a v kontextu transatlantického partnerství a v kontextu NATO. Takže já chápu, že vy jste zmiňoval, že vlastně došlo k jistému zredukování, k tomu oslabení vztahu, ale z našeho hlediska šlo o to dosáhnout toho, aby ten program byl úspěšný, aby uspěl. A také chápu, že obecně zahraniční politika ve Spojených státech je předávána, navazuje vlastně mezi jednotlivými administrativami, tak v tomto případě došlo k radikálním změnám. Poté, co nastoupil Bush a potom zase došlo k dalším změnám, poté, co se stal prezidentem Barack Obama. Ale myslím si, že stále platí ten základní cíl, a to je snížení počtu nukleárních zbraní.
Veronica, would you like to add something to that? We know that in Western Europe, in Germany, France, young people find anti-Americanism very popular. What about the Czech Republic in Europe? Well, I believe anti-Americanism is closer to Czech Social Democrats. At the same time, freedom trumps Westerns. It's long gone. Nevertheless, there's still a difference between Western cultural anti-Americanism and just born Czech anti-Americanism. What do you think? Well, it's difficult to provide figures or statistics, but it's my feeling that we are better suited. There is no such strong anti-Americanism among young people in the Czech Republic. owing to Fulbright Foundation, owing to New York University in Prague and other institutions, there are great links among Czech and American students via Facebook and other social media. So Czech students are well aware of the fact that to be admitted to prestigious US university is a great thing that will develop them very much. So I believe, and perhaps I'm being slightly naive, both left and right elites know that if they want to succeed, starting from design through engineering and other branches, they must go to the US because their field of expertise is well developed there and they have a lot of things to learn. And that's something that is supported by the programs. We are a small country and there are lots of graduates of university on both sides of the nation. My generation was a teenager, or we were teenagers in 1989. We loved Americans, we fell in love with them, we knew Hair and other movies that got here. We all wanted to go to America because it's a Shangri-La. Many of us went there and we discovered that it was not. Nevertheless, we found lots of inspiration there, and our liking for America was born at that time. We have a crush on America, I'd say. We don't hate American capitalists, and instead of telling our kids that Americans are bad people, we perhaps try to convince them of the opposite. So anti-Americanism can be at its very early stage in the Czech Republic, but we have lots in common. Perhaps US and Great Britain had more anti-attitudes, including 50 Shades of Grey, an American movie originally written by a British author. UK, Germany, maybe France, they enjoyed the Western style of living. They were closer to America, and perhaps their anti-Americanism is deeply rooted. It has a longer tradition. Perhaps it's more justified. I don't know about Poles or Hungarians, but we Czechs believed that the United States are a country where everything was possible, and all of a sudden they discovered that you could not hold a can of beer in the public, and it was very surprising. Allow me a brief remark. UK can afford anti-Americanism because they do not play or toy with the idea of pan-Slavic nature, pan-Slavism. There are soft and hard relations, and they complement each other. They have certain momentum. And what we are talking about now is that there is lots of communication, lots of clubs that communicate at the social level, and it's one of the legacies of the 1990s the diplomatic and political level, we are preparing the playground for something that is going to happen within 15 or 20 years. So those soft relations, which are very important, are well established now, and it's great, and I have no problem with that. But I insist that without a good political background, things can get complicated, and perhaps in 15 years' time we won't be able to talk about such great relations between our countries. Veronica says that we have sort of emerging anti-Americanism. Perhaps we'll see from the trade treaty that is now to be agreed by the US and the European Union. If it's in the interest of large corporations, then the mechanism must be watched very closely. And there are serious agendas on both sides to promote the corporate culture that can harm end users, of course. But the voice that comes from Europe, saying that we are unable to promote our own agenda, that we are not enough self-considerate or self-conscious. And even people who lived in America show some kind of latent anti-Americanism, sometimes very stupid, of course. We suspect Americans from eating bad food, not taking care of themselves, and giving Americans bad intentions or attributing bad intentions to them. United States have agreed on something with 11 Asian countries, and the US and the European Union is still here waiting whether China would come to propose something better to them. Let me go back, let me return to the anti-Americanism. I'm not such a big optimist. The current crisis on the eastern part of the Ukraine and relations or attitudes of the Czech Republic to Russia worked as a catalyst, something that provoked very many anti-Western, anti-American attitudes. People say, well, Russia is bad enough, but look at the US, what they did in Iraq, in Libya, colonialism. Look what the West did by its colonial policy. So who we are to advise Russians what to do? And unfortunately, this type of arguments is spreading all around. It does not affect the young generation. It seems to me that the young generation is wiser than those who lived through the Russian occupation. And still, that generation, 50 plus, perhaps people who are 50 plus, and especially those who are leftish or post-communist, perhaps, they unfortunately have quite a strong anti-American attitudes. I receive reactions to my articles, and I receive emails written by almost an organized group of people who talk about American invasion in the Czech Republic, they talk about American imperialists. This is the terminology that they use, and it's widespread, so I would not underestimate it. And the good thing is that the young generation, young people, do not seem to be affected by this. Perhaps they are more wise than the parents, all the people, all the intellectuals who compare America to a threat. I was appalled by an idea by Petr Uhl, who said that America was a bigger threat than Russia.
Well, I was also appalled. Would you like to comment on that, Raymond?
I'm an American, so I'm necessarily an optimist to a degree. And I think to a certain degree we sometimes suffer from a naivete as Americans. You see it, you see the tourists who come and they're so excited and they think everyone should be their friend. But I don't see, perhaps as deeply into Czech society, I don't see this I don't see an anti-Americanism that's on the surface. Partly that's my job. The team here at the center, the diplomats who work with me, we go to about 100 školy or universities every year to speak to students. However, if you read the German Marshall Fund research, throughout Europe, there's less good feeling towards America. Certainly, some of that was inflicted by ourselves. The actions that happened in Abu Ghraib, some of the things that happened in the fighting in Afghanistan make it very difficult for people to look at the United States in the same way. However, I take offense at the idea that in some way the United States is invading the Czech Republic. You see these things on some of these internet sites, Protiprod and other things, and they are absurd. They're absolutely absurd. And I also don't think that we can be equated with a Russian government that owns the media and puts out fabrications. So this is something that we're wrestling with. And we also wrestle with, where we are in the negotiations to try to bring the Russians back to the table, to try to end what's going on in eastern Ukraine in a peaceful way. It's not peaceful now. People at this table and in this room recognize that. And so it's very difficult for me to understand why someone who lived through communism and to turn back to why we're here today, to Havel, to turn back to that triumph, because that's what Americans think of. When they think about 1989, and when I think about the Velvet Revolution, we see a triumph. We see a triumph of people who endured decades of oppression and managed to win freedom peacefully, and it was tremendously uplifting to Americans. And so to have people then sort of look at what Russia is doing and say, well, what the US might be doing is worse, it's hard to understand. So.
Thank you. Tak já bych teďka teda přeskočil k těm evropsko-americkým vztahům a k tématům.
Getting to some current affairs, current topics. If you look at the history of the crisis of Eurozone, President Obama had long conversations with Angela Merkel and they helped also to stop the crisis of Eurozone, and now what we hear are two things. We hear Barack Obama, who is saying you cannot squeeze out any juice from a squeezed out lemon, you need to come to some deal with Greece, and America is considering providing some weapons to the Ukraine. Even though Russia does not pose a direct threat to the United States, Russia's presence in Ukraine. So I have a feeling that America, to some extent, still has to care for Europe, help Europe, and I understand that Europeans might feel that they are being patronized by the US, but what is your opinion on this involvement of the United States in Europe, of their role, of the care, whether they should show it or not?
Well, once again, the United States, in this case, the United States walks with the Czech Republic. We are allies in the NATO alliance. The United States and the European Union walk together as well, and the Czech Republic is a member of the EU. And right now, what we are proposing is that we support Ukraine's right to have its own borders, to have its freedom of sovereignty, and to have that not be threatened at the point of a gun. And I believe that we are together on this, that the United States, with our NATO partners and our EU partners, are together. And we are in support of Ukraine and Ukrainian sovereignty, and that's where we stand. We are keeping options on the table. But right now, what we want is that the separatists and their Russian supporters to come back to the table, to the agreement signed in Minsk, which they have not done, and start executing that. Let's have a ceasefire. The Ukrainian government's willing to let a referendum happen, but how can that happen with basically fighting going on every day?
Well, I will comment on the part that concerns Ukraine, part that concerns security policy, because I'm not an expert in economics, so I cannot comment on the Eurozone problems, but I have two comments, and I became aware of a quite trivial thing when I read the national security strategy of the Czech Republic, and later I read the new security strategy published by the White House in 2 days time. In our declaration, in our strategy, we declare that we are part of NATO and we want to be a valid partner within NATO, while the American strategy, which is much more brief than the Czech version, it says we lead. And when you read that, you see the difference in perspectives, which is quite understandable, quite trivial. When our Prime Minister comes to his office, he receives some security information, and there are about some arsenal there in the Czech Republic which exploded. When Obama comes to his office, he has security reports about the Islamic States, about problems in China, etc. So the perspective is completely different, of course, and I think that Obama's instinct is to leave Europe to settle its things themselves. When he does not rule out providing weapons to the Ukraine, then he is pushed by the Congress and also partly by his advisory team. But it is a difficult topic for the democratic establishment, because one part of the team supported Brookings Institute analysis, and at that moment Fiona Hill published an article when she said that in no way should the US provide weapons to Ukraine. So my feeling is Obama would rather focus on other parts of the world than Europe if it was possible, because this is just related with the development of powers on the global scale. I personally would be happier if the White House and President Obama specifically would internally feel the need to get more involved in Europe, but I understand that he is not that much, it is not that important for him as other parts of the world. Well, I think there are two types of understandings or misunderstandings. On the American side, America has a long history of federalism, and therefore even it is rooted in, and therefore it has some forms of solidarity that are based on federalism, and it is quite understandable for every American that through the federal level there exists solidarity between richer and poorer states within the American Union. And I think this is one of the reasons why Obama wonders when he looks at the European Union, why Germany is so strongly defending their interests, and why Germany forces with all its might this squeezed out lemon to pay back its debt, as it was mentioned. In America it would work different way, because there is real federation. In the European Union is not a real federation, so there are different perspectives on these issues, and the American perspective is understandably different than the European perspective, because Americans sometimes do not very well understand why Europe, which now has all the opportunities to behave uniformly as a single unit, does not do so. And the misunderstanding on the European side is that Europe has more larger ambitions than what is its real potential. So after many decades since the end of the Second World War, it would like not to be dependent from the points of security on the United States, but it is not able to do that, and this gives rise to kind of negative attitudes or animosity towards the United States, which is caused by frustration. The European Union as a whole is richer than the United States if we take all European countries together, but we do not have sufficient capacity to take care of our security, and this we have to ask the United States to guarantee security, and this causes to situations where Europe is not able to intervene in the former Yugoslavia, for instance, or intervene in Libya or Middle East, and it has to be again the United States that will do the work. And the Europeans on one side, in one way, they look at it as something that at the end will always have to be done by the United States, but they also at the same time blame United States for doing that. Because this is the attitude on part of the European Union, and the basic difference in perspectives. It is caused by different cultures, by the differences in cultures and different viewpoints. Well, in my work, I do not deal with these topics. What I had in mind when I made my comment was something what was mentioned by Mr. Pehe. I think that the dependency of the European Union on the United States, unfortunately, is not only in the area of security, but it is also psychological. Automatically, whenever these European countries are in some problems, whether it is France, for instance, which is not sure whether they will get involved in Afghanistan or not, whether it's the crisis in Greece or any other bigger problem that needs to be addressed in individual European countries. I think that the relationship is patronizing, and rightfully patronizing, because these individual countries are not able to formulate their attitudes to show where they stand, and so they behave a little bit like small children in their relationship toward the United States. Well, I have a question that is related to that, to Mr. Castello. Do Americans take Germany as a standard country now? It was reminded here that 25 years ago there were big discussions about the future of Germany. The Germany likes to call itself economic engine of Europe, or local power, and at the same time it does not meet its obligations without in terms of contributing to the NATO budget. It does not want to get involved in any military action in Ukraine. France and Britain are countries which to some extent can still be considered military powers. So what is the view from America towards Germany? Is it perceived as a standard country, or is there something special?
Well, I would say yes. We perceive Germany as a standard country. We consider Germany one of our strong partners. We call on all of the NATO allies to please bring their defense budgets up to the level that we'd like, that everyone has promised to do. There are many countries who fail in that particular regard, but we see Germany as a major ally, and we have for many years now. And I think it's interesting to go back. If I go back in time, and I think about how America viewed the world really when I was growing up, was, there was Europe, and Europe was the Europeans were our allies, and then behind the Iron Curtain, to quote one of our presidents, was the evil empire. But it was made up of all sorts of other countries that didn't want to be there, including part of Germany. And so if I look at my daughters who are 15 and 10, they don't, as they learn this history, as I watch my 15-year-old learn some of the history, I think she's rather surprised, because she's grown up around, in a community where Germans and Russians and others are all there. They're part of the community. And so it's hard for them to conceive of how it once was. I don't know if that's entirely a satisfying answer.
Thank you. Of course, I understand. I posed this question to a diplomat, so I received a diplomatic answer. Well, I can offer only sing a joke, which I'm afraid many of you already know. This is a joke about three militaries, three people, French, German and American, that are captured in war, and they are sentenced to death, and they can have a last wish. French says, we are a culture nation, we like good wine, good food, I would like to drink a glass of wine before I die. Well, they say, okay, you can do that. And they ask the German, well, we are more intelligent, we Germans are more intelligent than French. I studied Heidegger for all my life. I would like to have a 1 hour less lecture about Heidegger before I die. And they say, okay, it's a strange wish, but okay. and they ask the American, and the American says, I have just one wish, please shoot me before this German starts making his speech and our speech. Well, I will not be that funny. I will just say, I'm not. You ask whether Americans see Germany as a standard country. I think that they did not very like the position of Germany when they tried to avoid any military involvement in Afghanistan. But this is true. But if there is some mythical one number that will be called, if Washington wants to call some line, then they would call Chancellor Merkel, because this is the most important post they can contact when they need when some situation needs to be resolved. And we saw that also in the past 2 weeks when we watched the diplomatic efforts of Marga Maker. This also applies to Ukraine. I think that François Hollande was there just to accompany her, to make sure that she does not go alone to Moscow. We can think about it, we can discuss it, whether it was a new Munich Treaty or not. I do not think it is something like that. So we'll see whether Minsk II will survive in the next few days. But however are Germans perceived by Washington? One thing is sure, they knew that the main line, the phone number they should call is now in Berlin. I think we have now time for your questions. Please introduce yourself and also specify to which of the panelists you direct your question. So, and please use the microphone. Can do it like in school. I can call up on somebody to ask a question. We did not make anyone angry either, I see. It's strange. Mr. Joch will have a question. Roman Joch, Civic Institute. I do not have a question, but I have one. I will ask one question, and then I would like to share some alternative version of the joke that was mentioned by Mr. Pehe. Well, my question relates to the uniqueness. I really feel that the era of the 1990s and the beginning of this century was unique due to many factors. And I think that starting with this president, from this president, we cannot expect any unique relationships between Czech Republic and US, because there is no reason why was the situation unique. George Bush was the president, and for his administration, the fall of the communist regime was a legitimization of the correctness of the policy pursued in the 1980s, where he was a vice president. This means we were his favorites, not only Czech Republic but also Hungary and Poland, because it was a great success of their policy. Clinton established a very good friendly relationship with Václav Havel, because here just the personal level was very important, and it can repeat again in the future, but it is not guaranteed. And there was also another reason. During the Cold War, the poor Democrats in the 60s voted for Democrats, and then they changed. And Bill Clinton wanted to be re-elected, and one of the ways how to win loyalty of poorer Americans of Polish origins was to support integration of Eastern Europe into NATO. And then after 9/11, when many allies did not like the decision made by the American, the Eastern European and Central Europe countries were not, their position was not confrontational. So these were some of the reasons for the uniqueness of the relationships in the past. But I think that in the future, probably we cannot expect the relationships between Czech Republic and US to be unique. And I think that we are now in a new era. And now I would like to come to the joke. The terrorists from the Islamic State capture French, German and Israeli citizens. Again, they have the last wish. The French wants a glass of wine, the German wants a glass of beer, and the Israeli says, please, could you kick me in the ass? They do that. When they kick the Israeli is good in military, in fighting, so he just fights all the squad and he frees them all. And they ask him, why did you not do that straight away? Well, he said, because I didn't want the press to write that bad Israelis attack Arabs. Well, I agree with your analysis that you provided regarding the unique relationships, and I think that the unique relationships did not end because of what happens. It is because we do not have such strong personalities. It always takes some time to create unique relationships. And sometimes these unique relationships survive for a little bit longer after these personalities leave the scene. And I agree with what Mr. Anýž said. We should be concerned about the Czech-US relationships in the next 15 years, because we need to develop these relationships on the continuous basis. This is what is at stake. We need to continue our efforts to see the results in 15 years' time. So we should focus on building the new era, knowing that we do not have personalities like Václav Havel anymore. Well, when I collaborated with Václav Havel when we met with an unnamed American ambassador, I said jokingly that Václav Havel is a great contribution to Czech-American relationships, but that he is also can be blamed of something that can be called deceptive advertising. And Václav Havel wanted to know what I said or what it means, and deceptive advertising means that you promote something that not playing some trick, that you put a facade on the Czech Republic that it does not really deserve. So the Americans and other countries think that the situation is much better than it looks from the outside. And unfortunately, I was right in that remark, because when Václav Havel left, this facade went down and we became more what we really are, in my opinion, for the outside world. And unfortunately, I am a little bit more pessimistic than my colleagues, because I think that we did not move towards some normality, and I'm afraid that we, in the eyes of the United States and of other Western allies, we can get even below the level of what is standard or normal if we continue the current foreign affairs policy, and especially if some activities of our current presidents are continued.
Before I pass the floor on to my colleagues, I'd like to ask one question. In the Czech Republic, it was not published enough, but the US government recently imposed sanctions against 12 Hungarian citizens, government officials close to Prime Minister Orban. Justification can be found at the website of the American Embassy in Hungary. Officially the reason was corruption, but the true reason perhaps can be pro-Russian attitude. Can something like that happen to Czech officials? Skutečný důvod je korupce. Pravý důvod je korupce.
Oh, and we never published those names. That was courtesy of President Orban.
Daniel, would you like to comment on that? Well, today I read in Czech newspapers that the ANO government, the ANO movement has its own foreign policy, which is surprising, and also an important piece of information. Your ambassador visited the Čapí hnízdo place, and obviously it's a serious thing when one of the two strong government parties supported by the public does not provide any opinions on foreign policy, and they do not talk about Ukraine and the engagement of the US in this conflict, or the presence of US bases in Europe. And I think Czech representatives should not be afraid to talk about these things. It would be for the benefit of the Czech Republic. And when it comes to Hungary, diplomacy is not happy, is unhappy where its relation with a member of NATO has got to. It's a great warning for us. I went to Washington to the Congress when the bust of Václav Havel was revealed there, and I talked to Czech diplomats and I asked them about our position, whether we are following Hungary, and they told me we are not there yet, but we are only slightly lagging behind, and it's not a joke, it's a very serious problem, because there are opinions and attitudes presented at meetings. We are a difficult partner, we are a problematic partner, and I consider that to be even fatal, because what Minister Stropnický said, as a politician, as a Minister of Defense, he should be brave enough or bold enough to promote its opinions, to defend its partners, not to resemble Soviets. And these are details that play an important role. František Staněk, KCO. Allow me to say this. In 25 years of activity, the American Embassy did a great deal of work for civil society, so it established a good base for our relations. But we have a special Czech mentality. If there is someone who'd be better than us, we try to do harm to him or her. In the US, the opposite is true. When there is somebody who's likely to succeed, everybody seems to support him or her. I talked to a director of an American corporation, and he told me that he started his career by sweeping the yard. So, and he ended up as vice president and then CEO. So we have a good base, good starting point, young people who are willing to fight for democracy. And we need to follow their example, because we don't want politicians to steal our rights. It's up to us to fight for democracy every single day, to take care of ourselves. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have brought a copy of the Echo Weekly. I'd like to show it to you. There are two men. And I'd like to ask you, that these two men wear Russian chapkas, Russian caps. Would you please comment on that photo, and could you compare it to the photo that we can see there, up there? And what do you think about the fact that Mr. Gandalovich is to be replaced by, God forbid, Hinek Kmoníček? Let me show you this front page. Well, it's an attempt for hermeneutic interpretation. It's self-explanatory, perhaps. They must have had a good reason not to put an American flag on that title page. In one interview with Miloš Zeman recently, I heard something that I had heard before from Mr. Petr Hájek, a close ally to the former president, Mr. Klaus, when there were those demonstrations against Zeman at the Národní Street, that was a complot of US services, and this was something that journalists asked Zeman, and he, instead of saying, "What are you talking about? This is a nonsense," he said, "Well, I don't know, perhaps it can be like that, everything is possible." I myself am grateful to America. I have both Czech and US citizenships, and I was very surprised why the American embassy did not send a note to Zeman, or I believe they should have invited him to the embassy to provide explanation. That's what I would have wished for. You issued a note, a statement. Ano, vydali jsme prohlášení, že to bylo naprosto absurdní. Bylo to pro nás překvapivé, proč prezident spojenecké země by říkal něco takového. Označil bych to slovem překvapivé. For me, the difference between Václav Klaus and Miloš Zeman is the only thing. Václav Klaus was more, let's say, disciplined. He knew that the radar thing included the presence of US soldiers in the Czech territory. And he had his right to doubt it. He was against the radar, but he never made any public proclamation. His public position was, yes, if it's necessary, okay, I'll keep silent. Unfortunately, Miloš Zeman is a uncontrolled missile. He likes making chaotic humbug Chamberlain's umbrella for Minister Zaorálek. It was a petty thing, but he's 65. It's a diagnosis, don't you think? So that's the main difference that I can see between the two presidents. And the Czech president is doing harm to Czech-US relations. That's clear enough. As Mr. Pehe said, obviously it was a provocative question by the press, and it's, you know, I don't want to go in any further detail. And to Mr. Komoníček, I'm a moderator, so I need to refer to that. I don't know when the US went to Iraq, 1992, 1993, and Mr. Komoníček took part in a business mission managed by Šlo and George H.W, a controversial businessman, to Iraq that was perceived by the US party as a very unlucky, unfavorable. It was a mistake to go to Iraq. But if I were to become a Czech ambassador, I would not do such thing. Mr. Castillo will obviously not comment on that, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I would say there is an ambassador in Washington right now. His name is Gandalevich. So.
I believe it's not 100% sure that he will become the ambassador, and it will depend on his loyalty, and he's capable of being loyal to many parties. So it'll depend. If he's a professional diplomat representing the Czech administration and the government, it can be bearable. But if he's a close ally to the castle, then it could pose a problem. So thank you very much for coming to this conference. I'd like to thank the US Embassy for making this possible. I'd like to thank Helena and his colleagues. I'd like to thank all panelists and all of you to come, and I'm looking forward to see you soon. Thank you. Goodbye.